Hello again, everybody. This is workshop number 2. We're going to start looking at assignments, start seeing how these field trips work out to be finished reports. So I've got a list here of all the students and the different topics you'll be working with, and government documents we'll be mostly avoiding, but we'll look at them fairly quickly and shortly. So Indian trails, Quinn has that. I've been in contact with him. He also has 3C's Roads and Columbus Day Storm. So Evan and Kevin, you're in pretty good shape. Quinn's already made contact. He's got a good running start on the Indian trails. And Quinn, it'll be up to you to make sure that Clarissa and Reagan do good work on their topics. We've got the Pre-Elliott Roads with Kevin, who is also on Indian trails, and he's also on early logging. So Kevin, I'm guessing you like early history, because this is all things that took place before the Elliott was formed in 1930. They're all interrelated. They're an important part of our history. And so I will be giving on your handout that I send, I'll be giving references and so on. But if you followed the field trips and followed the links, you're already seeing where a lot of this information is being developed, and you're getting precise references, page numbers, and maps, and so on. Clarissa, you got 3C's Roads, and that's very fortunate. We've had a whole field trip on it. Jerry Phillips is the expert on 3C's in the Elliott. And we also got Bill Lansing's book. He just allowed us to put that online. So you've got very good references to start with. And you'll be getting help from Quinn and Nicholas. Nicholas, you got early logging, 3C's Roads, and Pre-Elliott Roads. I don't know if you're friends with Kevin, but it looks like you have real similar interests. So we're covering those topics really well. As I say, the handout will have references, maps, oral history transcripts, plenty of things to work with. Columbus Day Storm, Reagan. You got also Pre-Elliott Roads and Dean's Mountain Lookout. So Reagan, the Columbus Day Storm is pretty darn interesting. We've covered that pretty well in the field trips, and we'll be covering it more. Field trip number 4 in particular, you'll be interested in. And again, I'll be sending out that information. And you have Quinn and Ethan to help. Ethan, you got Cougar Pass Lookout, early logging, Columbus Day Storm. So you basically got most of the historical period. The Cougar Pass Lookout, there's been a separate site. That's the first site we've ever put up that wasn't on Oregon websites. It's on a Google account. We're experimenting with it. Dr. Sullivan and I have put that proposal together based on earlier discussions, and that'll be interesting to see what you come up with. But you've got a lot of your work done for you already. When we do the reports, you'll be off to a running start. So that leaves Evan. Evan, you got Dean's Mountain Lookout, and just like the 3C Roads, Jerry Phillips is the expert. So there's a lot of information on it. There's good photos on it, good maps to it, good history to it. So it's going to be a matter of not doing much original research so much as consolidating what's already known. We've also got Cougar Pass Lookouts. So you'll be steeped in lookouts and Indian trails. So that's kind of an eclectic combination. Now, these are the 7 topics we got. You've all got your general assignments. So today we're going to go over how to put this into a written report or an appendix to the earlier plans, or maybe a standout document on its own, but these will be the different chapters or the different papers that go into it. Now, all of these things, all of these topics may or may not qualify for National Register of Historic Places. In recreation, having a being on the National Register is really important because it's an attractant. It's something tourists come to see. So each one of these we'll be looking at, could it possibly qualify for the National Register? We'll also be looking at these documents, but they've got a ton of acronyms, and I always say they're for professionals, and you need a decoder ring to understand a lot of it, but we'll be getting to the basics, opening the door on these potential proposals. We'll be using the 2018 student report, SWOCC report. The recreation area map is a potential historic district. So we're going to look at that as the boundaries to your work. So a district, the historic district, is an area, and it can have several different structures on the National Register within that district. So if we have the Elliott State Forest as a district, which is something you can figure out if that's worthwhile or not, then each one of these things can also be on the National Register as part of the larger area. One of the acronyms we will be using is SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office. That's in Oregon. That's for historical resources that might not be on the National Register, or they could be on the National Register, but they're important to the state. So the State Historic Preservation Office is in charge of direct applications. We're not going to be making an actual application. They're pretty complex, but we will be looking at the basic guidelines to guide what we're doing. SHPO has a report, which we'll look at briefly on the computer in a bit, for linear cultural resources. Trails, roads, road networks, those are linear resources. Fence lines, irrigation ditches, if they're historical for some reason, if they're significant, there will be tests of significance, then this is your guidebook for that. And it is, we'll look at it, but it's really poorly written and difficult to follow, but the basic parts of it are very useful. So we'll just be looking at that briefly. There's probably 3 or 4 pages in the guidelines that you really have to focus on. Finally, section 106, National Park Service does it. That's what guides National Register of Historic Places. All federal properties have to ascribe to section 106 analysis if there's any cultural resources, any construction, or any desire to designate a place as historical. So this is the federal level. We'll be looking at it, but we're on common school fund land. That's state, it's a state forest, so it doesn't necessarily apply. It might be useful, and it is the guiding light for SHPO, but we'll be looking mostly at SHPO. So the next thing we have to do is what does looking at it mean? We'll look on the computer and look at the specifics on it, but this will be setting the outlines to your reports. Okay, we just talked just briefly about section 106. What's important and what we'll look at a little bit more detail is test of significance. Why is this resource important? And so for the federal government to consider it, and then in turn the state government, they have tests of significance. That's the key thing. If your topic meets this criteria, then you pass the first hurdle on getting something designated for the National Register or for local recognition. So federally, test of significance is the resource has to be over 50 years of age. Every one of those topics is over 50 years of age. You have to have a range of ages, which you had in the first workshop. Historical time on the Elliott begins about 1850, or almost precisely 1850. On Mill Creek, there's development. Scottsburg shipped regularly to San Francisco. It was the head of Tidewater. So we start at 1850. That's historical time. Now there's evidence of pre-contact use, Indian trails, for example, but we will be looking at what we can document. So every one of the 7 topics is more than 50 years of age. If it's pre-Elliott forest, that means before 1930, when the Elliott was created. If it's post-Elliott forest, then the newest one is the Columbus Day Storm Road Network, 1962 to 1970. 1970 is 50 years ago, so we've got the range of years that has to be starting and ending point, and over 50 years of age. Another test of significance is if it's associated with a famous person. So George Washington slept here is the common example of a famous person that adds value to a property simply by occupying it. These tests are local, regional, and national. So you can have something that's really important locally, like the Indian trails would be local tribal use, ancestors on the land. That would be locally significant. Columbus Day Storm is regional. It went from Northern California up into Washington, maybe even into BC. I remember that event very well. So that was a regionally important event. CCCs were a national movement. So there's national tests of significance there. So we set the scale and we test according to the different criteria. There's 4 or 5 of them. We'll look at them. It's basically 2 or 3 paragraphs that describe it. But this is a really critical thing, and this will be the opening paragraph or maybe 2 paragraphs in your report. You just have to report it's over 50 years of age and so on. A famous person, Elliott is our first state forester, so he is significant. The Elliott State Forest is named after him, so that's regional. Statewide or Western Oregon or the Pacific Northwest would be regional. He's not nationally famous, he's not nationally important, and he's more important than local. He was the state forester. So the Elliott State Forest, if we have that as an historic district, then an argument would be that it's associated with an important person. Famous events. You have Civil War battlefields. Those are the examples that are pretty common, that people will say, well, an event happened here on this field, and so therefore we want to preserve it, or we want to recreate battles here, or we want to put up a monument, or we want to put up tourist stands. It gives you a starting point for declaring something important because of an event. The event we have that we can use here is the Columbus Day Storm. That is a famous event, an important event, very important in the formation of the Elliott and its road systems. Finally, we have style of construction. There's only 1 fire tower left. That tower is rotten, it's dangerous, it needs to be removed or renovated or replaced, and that's one of our reports. That's the other, the Cougar Pass lookout site. But the road construction, the 3C roads, in some places are just as narrow as they were originally. All of the roads on the Elliott, except Highway 38 and the county road going to Loon Lake, are rock, and they were originally rock. So they've still got original surfacing, and that's important. This will sound silly, but the popping sound of gravel is part of the ambiance. That's the National Park Service term. A part of the smelling the dust on a hot day as you're driving down a rock road is important. Now the 3C roads, their construction is really important. It was those and the logging roads, for the most part, were done without engineers, and yet they've been stable for 50 and 70 and 80 years. They were very well built, but they were very narrow. So some portions of the 3C roads on the Uncas Ridge Road have been widened out to get trucks by and have more traffic. Other parts, such as the portion south of Cougar Pass, are the original alignment, original width. So the style of construction of logging roads for the Columbus Day storm roads is important. There's stories with that. I think field trip number 4, we'll even discuss that a little bit, or I will put in the notes. The 3C roads, that's important. Those are types of construction that you can identify what occurred, whether it's an event or a person or a process. So these tests of significance are pretty basic. On your resource, in your first paragraph or two, you say how old it is, whether it's associated with an event, what the event was, if it's associated with the person, who the person was. And so it's just basically a checkoff list. So that opens the door. That says, okay, this is an important resource. So now we need a description. And I've tried to design these so the workshops would be about 3.5 total hours. Tasha's told me you've got all week to do it. So you can use your own judgment. But test of significance, we'll go over that a little bit in the computer. More technical, real basic and easy to do basically. You have enough information already. And then description, 2 or 3 pages with citations. And the reason we have the citations is so if Jerry Phillips writes 6 pages on a topic, all you do is say, here's a summary of what Jerry has been talking about for 6 pages. You do that in a paragraph or 2, and then you cite it. Phillips, 1998, page 30 to 39, or whatever the heck it is. So what is it? You describe what your resource is. You might not even need a citation on it. You just need an explanation. Citations would be appropriate for Columbus Day Storm network, but not necessarily for Indian trails. So what is its history? Well, most of these items we've got really good histories. We've been looking at them in the field, discussing them, and I've given you links to the oral histories that describe them. So it's not a matter of repeating everything that you've read. It's a matter of repeating the important parts, the important dates, important circumstances, and citing whoever's written a lot about it. That's the key to this. It doesn't have to be real long. It could be a little bit longer if you want to make it. It's hard to imagine it being much shorter than 2 pages. But the final point is, why is it important? That's kind of the test of significance. It's a summary of saying, okay, here's what it is. Here's its background and history from the years that, the span of years. And this is really important because, and it can be your personal opinions, it can be a repeat of this, but it summarizes why this resource needs to be considered. Which brings us to part 3, recommendations. Recommendations, again, can be fairly short, but what do we do with it? Do we say, this popping gravel is really annoying, this needs to be paved? Do we say, you know, that should be a roadless area, that's not that's better for wildlife? Or this is an historic resource and we should develop a 106, section 106 application or a SHPO application. Once you've looked at these points, making recommendations is key. That's where you and your co-authors really have to do a little bit of brainstorming. That's the creative thinking on that. This is analysis, this is description, this is where you think, so what? How do we develop it for recreational access or as an attraction? Maybe it's an impediment, but that's one part there. That can be a paragraph or a page. So we're talking basically 3, 4, 5 page report, but very succinct with good references. Documentation, and we'll go over this with the forms, 4 photos, and they can be JPEGs, and we'll talk about that in just an instant, and at least 1 map. You got to have a map of what you're doing. Sometimes 2 or 3 maps are important, so that could be a consideration. These can be just downloaded or identified right online with a link. Anything that Oregon websites has got online, we own all that. Students developed it. You could use any one of those. You can use any one of those, or you can develop your own. We'll talk in a little bit why you're not going to go online and download something that somebody else has put up. That just adds confusion. There's plenty enough material to work with to accomplish these ends. It's all been linked up. It'll continue to be linked up. So this is the report. So that brings us to citations, and they're really important. But between what the students have done the last 2 years here at SWOCC and what we've been accumulating over 20 years, those are all stable. So anything off the ORWW website is good. You don't want any URLs. A URL is the internet address. It's on the bar on your browser from any offsite places. Now, if you find a government document or a book or something that's really important and applies directly to what you're studying, we can make a PDF of it. We can put it in our reference section, and then we'll have it on Oregon websites. But it's got to be public information, or we have to have permission from the author. So don't be using information from other websites, and I'll demonstrate shortly why that's really important. The way you list it, and it's been listed so far in your handouts and in the previous year's reports, is the author, the year, and the pages. So Jerry Phillips' book, a second edition, was published in 1998. That's the one we quote from. And let's say he's got some information on the 3 C's that you are summarizing, and it's on pages 37 to 39. So you go Phillips, 1998, colon, and then the page numbers. And there's lots of examples all through your work, and that's how you cite it. You don't have to put any more information than that, just so long as we've got it online. If there's 2 authors, and I just made this up, Dowd and Smith, and a publication year 2011, page 10. 3 authors become an et al. So on your reports, Indian Trails will be by Quinn et al. Or Early Logging will be Nicholas et al. Or 3C Roads, Clarissa et al. The co-authors become et al. You're listed in the bibliography in the reference section to the report, but for a citation, 1 name or 2 names maximum, publication year, and pages. And that goes for all text, for reports, for books, for articles, oral history transcripts. This is all you need to put down to document the section you're writing. Now for maps and photos, we've got hundreds and hundreds of them online. You've already seen lots of them. We'll look at a few more in a few minutes. You can just use the JPEG URL, and I'll explain that, but whatever we have titled that file at Oregon websites is fair game. We own those. We've had the same stable URLs for more than 20 years, 23 years, and whether grade school students or graduate students have put information online, it has stayed there with the same file names and same addresses, very minor changes over more than 20 years, some of them 23 years. So those are safe. So your images, maps, and photographs should be a JPEG format. Might be GIF or something else, but JPEG, URL, all your texts are cited this way. So I'm guessing you might have questions and I can't answer them. But you can send me an email and I can respond that way, or talk to Tasha, normal correspondence through there. But this is your draft. So once this draft is completed, you want to send it to your co-authors so they have time to read it and make corrections or suggestions and be helpful on it. So you'll be sending out your draft to Tasha. I think I get them. I'm not sure how this is going to work this year, but to your 2 co-authors, so that several people have these to consider for the next few weeks and to work with on the final workshop. Okay, here we are at the Oregon website's home page, and we're going to visit the 2018 draft. This is the first recreation plan ever made on the Elliott. The students did a good job. They had a whole lot of homework, and we're going to look at maps. Now, the reason there are 2 or 3 maps here of interest. This map up here is the recreation area map that the students did the first year, and we can see it starts at Scottsburg, it goes to Highway 101 and up through Allegheny, Golden and Silver Falls, and then over to the Old County Road from World War I. So above it is the Siuslaw National Forest. To the west is Oregon Dunes. To the south is Coos Bay in that area. So this area here, we have the campgrounds. All of those are shut down now. You don't need campgrounds in it, but I suggest that this would be a good boundary if you want to consider a historic district. It'd be the Elliott State Forest Historic District. All the roads and the lookout towers are all contained in here. Now, if we look at another map, here's a map from Jerry Phillips' book. We can see it's page 18, and we can see the old Indian Trail. We can see the Gould pack trails. Nobody's doing pack trails this term, but this is a map that you could use. And another map, this is specific to the old Indian trails and also the salmon runs. Here's the Hanas Coos Indians. Here's the Kuish. They used to be called Kelowatsit. And here are some main theoretical trail networks that are probably very accurate on how people traveled different routes. Here's the miles they traveled. And even though these are canoe people and travel mostly by canoe, they also have connections to Huckleberry Fields, to family members and other tribes, other locations. And most of these areas, they can walk 2 or 3 miles an hour. So it's only a few hours between tidewater on the Umpqua and tidewater on the Millicoma or Coos, or to Loon Lake or to the ocean beaches. So the walk trails are pretty straightforward. They're a lot shorter distances than the roads that we drive today. But these people mostly or largely traveled by canoe and followed the tides. So those are the types of resources we've already got. We also have more technical maps showing ownership patterns in that. Here's Elliott State Forest and BLM lands. So that's a resource from what students gathered 2 years ago. Now, if we go to what we're doing now on the roads, you can see the port of entry: Scottsburg, Reedsport, Lakeside, North Bend, Allegheny. And background would be Coos Bay, would go into Allegheny or North Bend. Gardner would go into Reedsport. Elkton would go in, Drain would go into Scottsburg. But these are the points of entry, and these are the road networks. If you look down at the bottom, these have changed. The years and dates and topics. This was speculated by Jerry and David and I in February as a working model, but we've already found the Benson Creek or Benson Ridge Road that we have set here as a Columbus Day Storm Road was actually constructed from Lakeside to the CCC Road right prior to the Columbus Day Storm. So it would be a pre-Columbus Day Storm logging road. From Lakeside, from the airport, the 3Cs built. They also built 6 or 7 miles of road, and this was all built by Lakeside Lumber Company. So that's incorrect information. And so that's the type of thing we'll be correcting, but this is the type of map that can be useful to what we're doing. Okay, if we come to today's workshop, Cinco de Mayo workshop, we have a reference section in there. And that reference section goes to Oregon SHPO. We talked about it briefly. And U.S. National Park Service evaluation, tests of significance. We talked about that. We mentioned section 106. Here's the Oregon forums. They got a whole lot of them. There's no real need to pay much attention to that at this point. But let's look at the Oregon SHPO forums, and here's guidance, recording and evaluating linear cultural resources, 2013 report. And we can see it's got a table of contents, and it describes purpose, Oregon survey standards, lots of information that you may or may not want to pay attention to. Here's roads, here are trails. There's actually logging railroad evidence still on the Elliott. No transportation related canals. So if we go down to this document is intended for historic preservation professionals. That's really important. That means there's going to be a lot of acronyms and a lot of really poor writing, lots of forms to fill out, and people do that professionally. They make these bulletins and they make the forms, and they use off-site URLs for citations. And this is only a 7-year-old report, and look at that. Nothing's there. It's already moved. So that citation is not a good citation just because it's not connected to anything. After 7 years, it's already dead. Now I tried this one here. You have to copy it, cut and paste it. It ends up the same way, just a dead report. So on page 3 here, we're getting ready to do a linear resource classification. We got to integrate it with survey standards. So we can see that a RLS is designed to allow preliminary evaluations for NR criterion, NR RLS level, and ILS and RLS. I don't know what that means, and it's really unnecessary, but there will be a lot of acronyms in these documents, and that's why it says hire a professional, because they're the ones that put them in there, and it's like a secret code, and they're the ones that take them out. Now we see linear resources can be classified as either structures or districts. That's important, and we've already talked about that. It can be a district and it can be a structure. And I think we got a break. So this is page 3 and 4. When linear resources are considered as comprehensive systems, are classified under NHPA as districts composed of many segments and features. So do we have an Elliott Forest Historic District? I would say there's a good chance of that. So this is basically the only important parts of this document for our purposes are the first the table of contents and probably pages 1 through 5. Literature review, we've already talked about that. You've been given links. We've got cultural resource studies. Literature review conducted prior to field work is composed of 2 essential pieces: the gathering and review of prior cultural resource studies, which we've got linked, within and near the APE. So I don't know what APE is, but I'm pretty sure it's the area of consideration, and you have to hire a professional to tell you what that stands for. And gathering and synthesis of prior historical research establishing historic context. That means summarize what's written in your own words, briefly, and put in a citation. Background histories, same thing. Here's a description how to do it. And probably that's it. Probably pages 1 through 5. And if we try another link, it's not there. Bigfoot is there. So you don't use links. The state uses them. Don't use acronyms except maybe SHPO in USA. They're confusing. They're unnecessary. And outside links. You cannot trust government links. We just demonstrated that. This document isn't that old. So that's the state form. It's probably 5 pages of reading and looks specifically at 2 or 3 statements. And you can cite that as Oregon SHPO, date, and page number if you want to use any of that information directly. Now the National Register Bulletin is the next step. It's got the test of significance, and the table of contents is important. How do you use it? How to define categories of historic properties? And here's the one we're interested in. How to evaluate a property within its historic context. That's the test of significance. So understanding historic context and how to evaluate, they're leaving off the important words, which is tests of significance. And here they are. An event, Columbus Day storm, a person, Francis Elliott. Design, construction, 3C roads, logging roads, and information potential. All of these locations, by being over 50 years of age, have archaeological potential. The Indian trails, for obvious reasons, pre-contact information, but the 3C roads, the logging, the towers, the lookouts, there is archaeological evidence there, and there's a lot of fun projects for students. So those are the tests. So let's go down to page 8 or so, I think. Yeah, okay, so here is another problem with government documents. How to evaluate a is not an acronym. They have plenty of space, but formatting isn't always good. So I'm not sure why these documents have bad links, unnecessary acronyms, and bad formatting, but they do. Another reason to hire a professional. Of course, this work was put together by professionals, so that's a difficulty. To qualify for the National Register, a property must be significant. They don't put that in the title. That's the key word. That is what's important. So how to evaluate a property with its historic context. And we see an event, a famous person, a building form, a research topic. So we've just covered that over and over. You just need to make a statement at the very beginning. This is why it's significant. And you got basically the table of contents and pages, areas of significance. Agriculture, forestry is under agriculture. Archaeology, prehistoric, historic, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, those all engineering. Those all have a industry, logging. So these all have a military. We had a lookout during World War II in the Elliott. We had 2 lookouts. Here's the local, state, and national historic context. Sites with more than one historic context. Logging roads are built on old Indian trails. So that goes down to page 10. So this form here, probably the first 10 pages, particularly pages 8 to 10, and the table of contents. So you can go to the table of contents, get specific information. You can go to pages 8 and 10 and get general information. Basically, these are ways to cite or reference general information I've been telling you, and we won't be developing any of the forms or filling out any details beyond that. Okay, everybody, that's the end of workshop number 2. You've got your marching orders. You've got several hours to put this together. You know where the technical information is. You know what's expected as far as citations. You have your topics. If you have any questions, please direct them to Tasha, or you can send me an email. I'll respond to it. The main thing is get your draft written. I think you've got all week to do it. It shouldn't take that long. And then get it to your co-authors and to Tasha. And I think, but I'm not sure how this is going to work, I think I'll get a copy too, but we'll find out. I'll see you on our next field trip.